Hello, greetings and salutations, and welcome back to two mediocre blokes drinking coffee and talking all things Doctor Who.
Something like that. I actually drink vitamin water, but I'll give you that.
I had a feeling.
We are actually
It's like
not
breakfast with PLD and PJ.
There you go. The breakfast in the big blue box. Is that going to be our new name?
I would love that. Could I have cereal every time we do it?
Don't you anyway?
I mean, generally, yes. But sometimes I try not to eat on camera. I try to be professional. I try to keep it professional.
You do. You try very, very hard. I appreciate that.
And I only succeed like 80% of the time, so I think that's a pretty good track record.
It's pretty generous, but okay, I'll take it. I'll give it to you.
How dare you?
I dare.
This is the kind of abuse that I have to tolerate so that I can talk about the good thing that is Doctor Who with all the good people who watch, because I like Doctor Who. Who doesn't like Doctor Who?
Yeah. That's a good question. Nobody I know. Everybody I know loves Doctor Who. 100%.
It's a good thing I'm the only person you know.
Especially this episode. This episode is not in any way divisive, not in any way polarizing.
Not at all. Okay, I gotta say, man. So a couple weeks back, I interacted with a human being who was on this planet who told me two things that were certain about life, apparently. No one likes hockey, which is wrong. And that this person was very excited that Doctor Who was coming back because it would be a lot less woke than the last couple of seasons. And every episode, I think about this human being trying to watch this show and laugh maniacally at how dumb of a statement that was.
That, I mean, there's a few shows out there, but none, maybe X-Men, none are as definitively inclusive, progressive
as Doctor Who.
Those like Doctor Who and X-Men. That's about Star Trek too. That's right. Doctor Who, Star Trek, X-Men have always been about progressiveness and inclusivity, and wokeness is just not like that's. If you're saying something's woke, then this is not for you. This is definitely not for you.
It's never been, and that's the funniest thing. Like, it's just not.
I never understood the argument because I always feel like they're like, oh, now they're pushing it, and now they're knocking us over the head with sledgehammers. I'm like, they kind of always have been. It's never. Maybe you didn't notice it because you just ignored it. I don't know what's going on.
I don't know, man. It's just so funny because I think of that, and then like all the people who get so upset at Star Trek, and I was like, part of the reason Star Trek was even originally canceled was because Kirk kissed a black woman on television. Like we forget that the Bible Belt lost its mind, and that was a whole thing. You know what I mean? Like, it's just so funny to me.
Right. Yeah, but I will say that this episode in particular is more along the lines of it's defining what the show wants to be. I'm kind of going away from the woke angle of it because this is it's not as important of a topic in this episode, I believe, compared to the other topic to me, which is leaning towards the supernatural, leaning into the fantasy. And I got to tell you, I understand why people didn't like the episode. To a degree, I adored it. I know you adored it. We haven't even talked about it.
Episode.
It very much is a Twin Peaks episode. But here's the thing: if you go into this episode and you're someone who likes answers and everything all tied up in a pretty bow, you're going to hate this episode. You're going to absolutely going to hate it.
It's basically if David Lynch made Doctor Who, and I'm not mad about it.
No.
The only reason I brought up the woke of it all, of course, because it is a part of all this.
Sure.
It's also very politically charged, and not at necessarily who everyone. I think that people think it's very targeted at one political ideology in person, but I think it's pretty much targeted at
political ideology.
Everyone making problems for the world right now. And I really commend the audacity of doing it the way that they do it.
I agree with that. Absolutely.
And we have to talk, it's such early days to have such a heavy Dr. Light episode. And a lot of this did come from the fact that Shooty still had to finish shooting Sex Education, which was shooting its final season at the same time this had started. So part of the reason that this episode exists in the way that it does is because Shooty was so busy doing Sex Education. So here we are now doing this episode that truly allowed, I believe, in my opinion, Millie Gibson, who I've loved so far on the show, fully came into her own within the series because this episode lived and died on her performance.
And this is the first thing she recorded.
Yeah.
That's impressive to all get out. I mean, usually it takes a couple episodes to kind of find your groove, to find the character, really feel. And she was spot on this entire episode, and this whole series has been spot on. I feel like it almost feels like we have checked in on them, like in a time when they've been together for a while and they've had their adventures. I know they have it. I know we've seen most of them, but it feels like they are just spot on clicking with each other and with the characters themselves. So yeah, I agree. Millie has a home run here. I was a little shocked at the Shooty list of it all so early, but that doesn't make sense with the as far as scheduling goes. Shooty's a big, busy man. But I have to admit, like I kind of was what I was saying a little bit earlier is the whole, if you like answers and you want them all pretty bow, you're not going to like this. If you can get away with that, it's good. I think there's a conversation to be had there, because I don't think this is simply a black or white kind of thing. Because I admit, when I watched it the first time, I watched it twice now, I was a little like, okay, it's almost like it felt, I kind of had a question myself. Is this lazy writing, or is this really is meant to be very vague? And how much can I get into it? I struggled a little bit the first time. Like, I don't, at the end of the episode ended, I was kind of like, I loved a lot of it, but am I okay with it being this vague at times? And on the second viewing, I was like, yeah, I am. I kind of like the fact that we have conversations about things. It kind of spouts over things. And I like some of RTD's statements, as in, we don't have to give you everything. Sometimes imagination can give you more, and it lets you like be in line with the characters of the show in a way, because you know what, they don't know everything.
Well,
So
in again, Dr. Light episode, he's
right,
not aware of what happens by the time it's over. Like, spoiler alert.
right,
And here's the thing, man. It's also not the first time in this show's history that we haven't necessarily gotten answers to a weird, wibbly wobbly, timey wimey thing. You know,
absolutely,
like, and especially in this iteration of the show, I think you really nailed a part of it. Is it's very leaning on the fantasy still. In
yes,
this episode in particular, with the idea that it was a fairy curse, and
mhm,
this fairy curse is broken by them, and it creates this basically alternate timeline
right,
around Ruby.
right, and that's spelled out.
And
We have a line from Kate saying that, basically implying that.
no, right.
Mm,
But we don't need more than that. Like,
no,
that to me, the answer is, and I'm gonna probably go back to this every time we have an episode that deals with anything like this,
mhm,
or in general deals with the fantasy elements, is it all goes back to the edge of the universe
yes,
and
exactly,
pouring the salt. And everything that we have seen so far this season continues to prove that while 14 was at the end of the universe, whatever he did with the salt is kind of messed with reality. That's
yeah,
why we're in the mavity of it all. That, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yes,
this is a perfect example of going in to the season, knowing all of that, knowing that Davies had said that it was going to lean on the fantasy element, knowing that it was going to be kind of a supercharged 8 episodes that was going to clip along fairly fast
right,
versus kind of taking its time. I think ultimately it'll all wrap around in some capacity, but I feel like this is the best case scenario of what you can expect from the show kind of going off its training wheels so early on and doing something so unique to what it is right now,
mm,
coming off the 60th. And I know that's such a weird way to look at all of it, but I can point to that and go, I understand why everything feels more heightened and more surreal. And I'm kind of loving the almost blatant Moffat-ness
yeah,
to the season that Davies has been kind of having fun with, because
yeah,
this feels very Moffat-y.
it
Um,
does,
and I know that's such a weird coin of phrase, but there's a lot of stories in the post Moffat era or during the Moffat era, like Big Finish, a couple of theirs, they have made them very Moffat-y in hindsight. Like they looked at his seasons and were like, "Oh, we could do something very wibbly wobbly, timey wimey like that." There's an episode of the Eighth Doctor Adventures called Paradox of the Daleks that basically plays into this. There's a beacon at the end of the universe, so the Doctor and his companions go to deal with it, and it's this space station that's apparently supposed to be attacked by Daleks. And the more that the time traveling in the episode happens, it turns out that the Doctor and the companions are actually in the Dalek suits, and they have to do all of this to keep the timeline going.
Gotcha.
And that's what this reminds me of those like Moffat taking a thing and running with it and going, I'm going to create this entire other alternate timeline thing, and it's just going to play out and loop right back to the beginning, basically.
And that's fair. You know what? That's that. But to be also fair, and then also RTD, like, I mean, I don't believe it was Moffat who wrote. I could be wrong. Did Moffat write Turn Left? Because this actually feels vaguely.
No, it reminds me of Turn Left and Midnight, because those are also very RTD. Yeah, because those are the
absolutely. The question I have about this is like, I'm really curious as to see, is this going to be a one-off like it is, or how much is going to tie into the Ruby Sunday mystery? Because of the potential that she is a goddess of some kind or of the pantheon. That's what that's been tossed out there. We've tossed it out there a few times. Does she is because it's who she is that why things happened the way they did? We don't really know yet. But I mean, that's one of the things, like the curse is so unexplained, and again, doesn't have to be explained, but we don't know why. Yeah, it's very magic, but like we don't know if would this have happened to a, say, quote unquote normal person as they're walking through, kind of thing. We don't know. We don't understand. And that's part of it. But I do hold to the idea that this could potentially come into play later on, and not be as one-off as you might think. I'm not saying it has to be, but it could.
I think it's going to be somehow still tied into, and I do think you're right. I think it 100% will be revealed that some of what happened is 100% also going to be tied into who Ruby is or what Ruby is, because it's very clear. I think with the whatever the ghost Ruby was telling everyone, I don't think that that's resolved yet, and I think that that's a down the line answer. And by down the line, I mean end of the season.
Unless RTD, I mean, RTD did flat out say in one of the interviews afterwards that you're not going to find out. But he wants it to be one of those things where he wanted to leave it to your imagination, because whatever you can imagine is worse than anything they could actually ever say. Which I get. It's the old monster.
No, totally fair.
Although I have determined what was said. I read some lips. I determined what was said. Here's this. That's what was said. Ruby likes pineapple on pizza. And that just threw everybody off. Everybody had to run away, screaming in terror. And that's completely understandable. That would make me disengage and get the F out of Dodge. Not going to lie.
I hope that you like doing this podcast alone. I really do, because that was a low blow, even for you, to do pineapple on pizza on camera like that. And I have to stare you in the eyes, just knowing, like looking at you and knowing that you're getting such an enjoyment out of being so wrong and so petty.
I saw that meme and I had to, I was going to text it to you. I went, no, I gotta see his reaction out there for that one.
No, I just got to stare at you like you were the dumbest person who ever lived.
And that's fine.
Pizza's awesome,
people
brother.
of lower intelligence, they obviously look upon someone like me and someone saying that they with awe and shock, and they don't understand.
There's an entire group chat dedicated to you being wrong for not liking pineapple on pizza. So I don't believe it is you saying that people like me are low IQ, my friend.
My genius is yet to be understood, and that's okay. Someday it will be.
You are a bad person. But anyway, pineapple on pizza is actually good. Okay. I'm glad we could get that out of the way. I'll say this too. As far as I'm concerned, one of the best parts about this episode, Dylan Holmes Williams, the guy who directed it, there's something very striking about the tension in the episode that's built up, especially early on when she goes into the town and she's hearing the like fairy story horror nightmare.
Yes.
And the way the camera sits on people's faces, and it'll be like this weird low shot. And the way that it's all just kind of ratcheted around, that this episode did a lot of that. It felt like the camera was kind of up here on Ruby a lot of the episode, which was really interesting because it just added to this idea that it made it feel unreal and like haunting, because you were kind of just watching Ruby in an almost uncomfortable state. And I loved that because it just made you feel as uneasy as Ruby feels about everything.
And that's part of the reason why I think they kept it so vague as well, because you put you in her shoes. Like, you don't want any answers from that. She didn't get any answers from that. We learn a little bit as she learns, and we get to make our own supposition on things. I will say that tonally speaking, you're absolutely right. I loved a lot of the parts of it. I mean, hell, the cabin itself just felt like, I don't know about you, I was watching, I'm like, is this American Werewolf in London? That's what it kind of felt like,
Right?
the vibe I got from that. And I love the fact that the townspeople there, they played with this whole, like, it's almost like they were kind of giving away the idea of an alternate timeline, because they had like these little pranks and jokes, like one that they didn't take phone money, but then they did. And then they had the story of like them dancing at the or breaking the fairy circle, which they bought into jokingly, and then had a laugh about it after. It's like, it's racist that you're actually thinking this way of us, that we're backwater people, that we're into this all this stuff. But like, it was treated so like sacredly at times as well. It was like this really big bait and switch that happened a lot. I think the whole episode was kind of like that. So great tonally piece there. And one other thing I want to say before I get too much further, since we're at the beginning. All right, people in the TARDIS this season really got to watch what the fuck they're stepping. It's like the third time this season that stepping has been an issue.
Well,
of course, you had to...
and again, it's so funny you bring that up, because remember, like, that was the first thing that happened with Millie and the Doctor when they get out of the TARDIS. And I do think that the whole Mavity edge of the universe, stepping on, like, all this stuff, all of these alternate realities surrounding them for so frequently, something's up, man, in a good way. Like, all of it's going to come into play. And to your point, people have to watch their step, because here it happened all over again. And like, this is the hubris of 10. And I like that, because I've talked about a lot that I feel like this version of the Doctor is every version of the Doctor in like the perfect amalgamation right now, while also being 15. Remember, she straight up asks him, if I step on a butterfly, isn't it going to change things? And he starts to be like, well, no one's going to step on a butterfly. Like, you'd have to actively go out of your way to step on a butterfly. And what happens as soon as he walks out?
Steps on a butterfly.
He is not paying attention to the things that he is doing.
Right.
He's so young again, and so idealistic again, and so full of hope and adventure. He's playing fast and loose with the universe, and he's forgetting about that. And he should have seen, coming from far away, not to step on the fairy circle.
Right.
But he's not paying attention.
Right. Now, that's that's one of those questions that people have asked that we don't get the answer for, is where did the Doctor go? If fairies take him away? Is that what happened? We don't really know. But I mean, again, do we need to know? Probably not, because she doesn't know. And honestly, he doesn't know, because by the next time we see him, that timeline has been averted, kind of. I also want to throw it out there that I know some people have had issues with the idea that he said something that the first time through, even before the circle was broken or anything, that Roger Apquillian was a famous person, evil, possibly bad person who had led them to the brink of nuclear war. I want to put out there, I think what is not being put out there as quite as much as that there's a big difference between at the brink of and going through with. And I kind of feel like before the original timeline, he would always be at the brink of. Whereas I think when they broke the line, if it wasn't for Ruby, it would have been completely gone over the line into the nuclear destruction. That's how I read it anyway. I think it kind of solves that issue for me, because I did have that issue too. I'm kind of like, well, he mentioned this. I had to think about it for a bit. But still, so that makes sense to me, and that's okay.
Well, I mean, like everything else, I tend to allow the show to kind of be fast and loose as it is, because Doctor Who. I just anticipate the show is always going to play everything a little fast and loose in some regard anyway. Um, I don't always need things to be perfectly lined up either. Like I'm good with the show just kind of doing the things it's going to do. And so with me, I just kind of accept every episode's answers as the episode's answers today. You
Right.
know what I mean? Like, unless it plays into the bigger canon overall, I tend to find that every episode is allowed to play by its own rules in some regard. We're going to find out later that, any episode, we've had him fight vampires so many times in the show, and every time it's going to end up differently, and et cetera, et cetera. So that sort of stuff, just let it happen. And I think that this is one of those things that you and I talk about a lot. I think that this is why I loved Lost so much and I loved the ending is that I was okay with not necessarily having everything answered and or given to me because I didn't want everything answered. I think that by attempting to answer every question, you take away some of the mystery and the fun of this show in general. And sometimes to what Russell T Davies said, right? Sometimes your answers are better than whatever the show is going to give you. Or whatever the movie's going to give you, or whatever.
I was about to say that, and I agree. It's funny. I noticed that. It's actually funny you say that because I quite frankly, looking at you and I, you are always someone who, like you just said, you give a lot of leeway. You have a lot of fun that way, and I am someone who gets there. Like my first time through, I do ask the question. I'm like, well, I kind of want to know what their explanation is. What is the intention behind it? At the end of the day, when I know that I'm not going to get the intention behind it, I can kind of connect the dots. And I kind of go, okay, I can kind of make it work. As long as I can make it work, is good for me. Now, there's that fine line because there's a fine line, right, between having me, the viewer, making the connections myself, connecting the dots on things, and bad lazy writing. There is that kind of fine line. I don't think this is bad lazy writing. I think this is exactly doing what it's intending to do. It's intending you to ask questions, intending for you to do the work. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but some people don't ever see it like that. And unfortunately, I think Doctor Who's not for you if you do that, because a lot of times Doctor Who will be about forcing you to kind of come to these things on your own, making your own connections. It's about what you feel, what you bring to the table as well. It's as close to an interactive show as you can get without being truly like interactive.
Oh, right. Honestly, it's so funny that you say it that way too, because I think that people also, to your point, when they get very upset and call stuff lazy writing, I do think that it comes from a place of not necessarily wanting to engage with content and
Right.
in movies. And I say content is the general, like I don't see everything as content, but in this scenario, we're going to just say the bulk of content, movies, television, radio, comics, doesn't really matter. There is bad lazy writing. There is. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to say that
100%.
there's not. When things happen in things like Doctor Who and Lost and Fringe or like Star Trek, I tend to find that with science fiction, I'm able to look the other way to bad lazy writing because I don't necessarily consider it bad and lazy. Sometimes convenient. Sometimes it's just about not answering the questions, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
And I think that this idea that we need to have everything said to us or told to us is really frustrating because you don't need to have everything fed to you. Sometimes it's okay to allow things to just be a mystery. Sometimes it's okay to allow things to be open-ended. Inception's ending is not lazy because you don't get an answer, right? Those sort of
Because
things.
Nolan had the answer, and I'll put it out. One of my favorite bits about Nolan was that he gets confronted with that, and the idea was you don't get the answer because the answer is not important. The answer
Right.
was that Leo's character, because I'm not forget his name off the top of my head, but Leo's character chose to be with his kids. Chose to not care about. He chose to not care about what the answer was. He chose to go away and do it. So if he doesn't care, that's the point. Why you shouldn't have to. You shouldn't care either.
Well, and I mean, people brought it up about Tenet too, and he said it recently during the Oppenheimer stuff when people kept pressing him for answers about what Tenet was, and he goes, "If your whole thing right now is trying to find the answers in Tenet, you're watching it wrong."
Exactly.
He was like, "It's not about the answers; it's
Right.
about what's happening, and just about the world. It's not about the rest of it." Like come on. It's so simple. It's so easy. It makes more sense that way. Like, sometimes it's okay for a thing to just be that thing. You don't
Yeah.
have to gel with it. Not saying you have to like it,
Yes,
but
exactly. That's my
that's
point.
what
That was
it's
my
a
next
thing.
point, was that you don't have to like it. If you don't wanna engage that way, you don't no one's forcing you to engage that way. You can absolutely say, "This episode wasn't for me. I
Totally
don't
fair.
and maybe I don't want this maybe this show isn't for me at times." Totally fair. But it don't I mean, to say it's lazy writing is just, I think, flat out wrong, 'cause this is not a case of lazy writing at all. This is a case of
Well,
intentional.
and again, I would argue to your point, I think that lazy writing is basically used as an excuse a lot of the time,
Yeah, I agree.
versus when there's actual lazy writing. Because you can
Right.
see real lazy writing, a lot of horror movies, just out of the convenience of it because you're going through the tropes. But convenience is also not necessarily lazy writing. Sometimes you just have to go with the trope, and that's okay too. Like
And it's yeah,
that sort of stuff works.
yeah,
Real lazy writing is movies like Into the Storm, which are shot in POV, like first person found footage type, and yet you have angles in the movie that don't make sense because there's no character with a camera standing over on the other side.
right,
That's
right,
lazy writing in direction.
right.
That's actually a thing. This is not one of those times.
Yeah.
This episode is very, at least in my opinion, it's very concisely written to be exactly how it needs to be, and it leaves it just vague enough the entire time that it makes it more intriguing. And
Mm,
honestly, I think that part of that is that the episode is so interesting because for the first time since Jody's regen, the episode just starts. There's no opening. Like,
yeah.
there's no opening theme. It just goes. And the moment that that happened, I was locked in for something that was going to push us and do something very different.
And what's funny about that, I didn't even realize that until the second viewing. Like, I
Oh,
didn't even
funny. I
realize it the
noticed
first
it
time.
right away.
I was kinda like, I was so engaged in what was going on, also, I was like, and I just went through it and just kinda just forgot about it. Next time I watched it, I was kinda like a little bit detached because, I kinda saw it from looking
Yeah.
through everything, and I went, "Wait, we didn't get the opening theme, did we?" Okay, we
No.
didn't. Interesting.
The only reason I noticed it right away is because I noticed their names on the screen on the
Mm.
bottom saying starring, and I went, "Wait, we're not getting the opening." And I immediately went, "Okay," and I just engaged with the episode, like, and it's funny how much of that makes the episode almost uncomfortable in
Yeah,
a way that because it starts in a way that you're not anticipating because the entire episode is not gonna go the way you anticipate, it makes you feel weird in a good way, and it's
and
unsettling.
it could be subconsciously too, obviously, because I had no idea, but subconsciously, I did feel that way. I felt like something was off. I couldn't put my finger on it. Another part about, like, doing things that you don't expect, like, I watched the trailer for this, and it pretty much was all in the first, like, 10 minutes of the show. There
Yeah.
was absolutely nothing that I can remember. Maybe I'm misremembering. I don't remember anything about, like, modern day, London and when she goes back and everything, 'cause, like, it feels like everything was from, like, the cabin and the Welsh, Highlands or whatever. It seems like there was nothing about what happens the second. So I was, like, expecting the whole episode to be in that cabin, in that vicinity. All of a sudden, here we are, not only jumping back to modern day London, all of a sudden we are jumping forward in time 30, 40 year, whatever it is, years we go
50
along,
years, I think, by the
50
time when
years.
it's done.
By the time it's done, yeah. I'm like, wow, this is not at all what I was thought this episode was going to be, and not necessarily in a bad way. Just like, oh, this is what we're
Yeah.
doing. Okay,
It it's so funny because I think the only other part of the episode that I remember being in any of the trailers was the shot of Ruby in the red, sweatshirt on New Year's Eve, and
mm,
she's looking out the window.
mm.
That shot of her with the glass of wine is in one of the trailers, and
Okay,
that's it. But, I mean, again, it could have been any episode at the time. It's not like I would have known.
right, right, right. And even if I
Like,
saw that trailer in this one, I could have been like, okay, so that was somewhere in the cabin, maybe, or something. I could have locked it away as something else potentially.
yeah,
Um,
100%, and that's what's so interesting is that this episode really was as mysterious almost as Wild Blue Yonder,
yeah,
in the same regard, because there was so much talk about this episode before we had even seen it, because we knew this was one of the early episodes that had been filmed because Shooty's schedule. We
right,
knew that it was gonna be a Doctor Light episode. There was a lot
right,
of talk about what the episode was doing,
right.
about that it was commentating on a very current state of world affairs in some capacity.
Mhm.
And that's made a lot of people jumpy and weird about this episode because I saw people before the episode even aired saying that this is not what Doctor Who was supposed to be. And I thought that was fascinating because it once again just proves to me that people don't engage with this show in a way that's other than surface level.
Yeah. Yeah. I can remember reading that as well. I remember reading it afterwards and kind of thinking, oh, it's too fantasy, it's too supernatural, but that's exactly what they said they were going to do. So they're leaning into it. You don't have to like that, but it's not bad. It's just what they want to do at the time. And trust me, stick around for a little while. It'll go back because that's just the cycle of the show, nature of the show, as it were.
I think
Yeah.
I said it in our very first or second episode of doing this.
Mm.
What's so funny to me is that when you look at the Russell T Davies era of Doctor Who in the beginning, like when he first came onto the show, it is so clear how much he loves the Tom Baker era of Doctor Who, but specifically like the first 3 seasons.
Right.
It
Right.
feels very close in tone and feel to those like early seasons. So the Eccleston through Tennant's early run really feel kind of like that.
Yeah. I'll hear that.
Since his return, he still loves classic Doctor Who, but as it turns out, he loves the back end of the Tom Baker era and the Colin Baker era
Yes.
because he's loving this like fantasy horror, like gods and monsters thing that Doctor Who doesn't always do, but now he's leaning on it. And I kind of love that.
Yeah.
And it's really fun and it
Well,
makes me happy.
I kind of feel like, and this is completely my speculation and completely so nothing that I can really can point to as something he said, but it almost feels like I remember we had the timeless child thing, and that kind of led to more like people were just pretty dissatisfied with that idea. But that always tended to go towards a cars that made the Doctor a chosen one of that sorts to a degree, that typical fantasy trope of the chosen one. And RTD said, I'm not retconning this. I'm not gonna say
Yep.
anything my friend Chris Chibnall did was wrong. I'm gonna deal with this going forward. I kind of feel like I almost feel like was that one of like the ideas of like, well, I'm not gonna change it, but maybe we could run with this and take the show into more fantasy lane that we have this kind of thing in place. So in order to explain it or maybe make it more palatable for people and for himself, maybe he's taking that in the direction of fantasy to be able to kind of maybe massage the idea a little bit and put it out there in a way that could be more palatable for us all, and win some people back potentially. I could see RTD completely trying to do that, and that would make a lot of sense to me. That's the basis why a lot of this started happening.
I could totally see that honestly. And I don't hate it at all.
No,
Again, I'm really enjoying this version of the show, and I like that it just adds this air of high fantasy. And high fantasy is a thing I talk about a lot in regards to stuff like Highlander and He-Man
mhm.
and that type of grandiose storytelling in a space setting, but it actually features a lot more fantasy elements. Star Wars is honestly very high fantasy in the same regard.
Absolutely.
I like that version of storytelling. I don't think we get a lot of it, and I kind of like that this season of Doctor Who is lending itself to playing with that sort of thing. And when you have an episode like this that allows them to basically do this like long play one act horror film that is kind of the Wicker Man, kind of like, oh god, literally any horror movie featuring fairy magic, anything Guillermo del Toro might have made once upon a time. There's this just air of weirdness as if David Lynch then came in and was like, and I am going to Twin Peaks this episode. Go with me. And I
It's
love it. It just allows itself to do something we don't see from it all the time.
well, I agree. It's actually funny you bring up Star Wars as a huge Star Wars fan myself. I fully agree that Star Wars is not sci-fi, but it's fantasy in a sci-fi world. And like you, I love fantasy tropes. I love all these fantasy tropes, but a lot of times they're left to the sword and sandal kind of thing, the Dungeons and Dragons, the wizards, the medievals, that kind of thing. That's usually what fantasy is.
Yep.
So having fantasy in a sci-fi realm like this, like Star Wars was, it makes for more uniqueness and more ability to tell cool stories. Could you go too far? Sure, you can go too far in the fantasy
You can go far
supernatural
in
direction.
anything.
You can go too far in anything you do, but I think that it's finding a good balance right now, and I hope it continues to find that right balance. Of course, in addition to that, Doctor Who has always been at least partially horror. We both know this. We both spoil. This is why we love it, because we love horror. So it has that side to it, and horror has always been something that, generally speaking, leans on supernatural.
Hiding behind the couch.
Absolutely, and
Moffat
leads to that.
famously talked about that. Remember that?
I remember that completely. Yeah, you're watching between your fingers, so to speak, as it were. Sometimes.
And Alex Kingston talked about it a ton. She was like, part of why she wanted to play the characters, she remembered hiding behind the couch from Daleks. And like, you hear all of the people who are involved in this show talking about being scared of some creature and or alien race in the shows. And I love that. I love that it continues to be allowed to be horror. And I mean, Moffat made a good portion of his run very horror-esque. Like, the honestly, his opening of season 6 is almost as weird, timey-wimey horrorness with vague to no answers right away as this was.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I mean about horror, though, also, because horror tends to lead on supernatural and fantasy elements all the time. So the fact that Doctor Who is doing this, because it's always been horror, it's actually doing things it should always be doing in the first place. So it finds that proper balance, and that's the important thing. I think is enough for everybody to go around. You just got to kind of engage the material a little bit.
Yeah, and look, again, no one's saying that you have to like the episode. If you just don't like the episode because you don't like the episode, like, cool, man, it is what it is. I can't argue with you. That's what it's going to be. Like, we all have our reasons for liking or not liking a thing.
Right.
Totally
Absolutely.
fine, totally fair, totally valid. But
100%.
once again, I also reiterate, if you're going to not like a thing, I hope you're willing to also engage with the thing and actually look and see what it is about it, and then talking about it and hearing other people, and then kind of redigesting what it is about it that works or doesn't work or whatever. And I find that when people look at things like this and they have it in their head it needs to be a specific way, they get real weird when it's no longer the thing that they want it to be, and it's doing it the thing that it needs to do. And it is the thing that I will preach on here every episode of this that we do. It's not about the story being the thing that you want it to be. It's about allowing the story to be itself. And you need to be able to engage with a thing in the way that it was written and presented, and not in the way that you're hoping it was going to be presented to you. Your fantasy does not mean, or the lack of your fantasy being the thing that the show is doing, does not make the show lesser for doing it.
Agreed. 100%. 100%. Susan Twist. You meet again. Susan Twist as the hiker. I did want to throw it out there.
She's everywhere, man.
That Ruby does notice her this time and makes that mention of, haven't I met with you before?
And talks to her.
Yeah, talks to her directly about it. Of course, Susan Twist denies it and just ends up doing her own thing. But very interesting how she's involved this time and yet still gets upended by the curse. I don't know, because like Susan Twist, we've kind of thrown out there, is she one of the pantheon? Is she one of the goddesses? Or something to that effect. But yet she's affected by the curse, or maybe she's just pretending to be affected by the curse because of everything going on. I don't know. Still very intrigued. I want to know what the hell's going on. That's one of the ones I want you guys to do at this point. At least a little bit.
I'm very curious what the answer to Miss Flood is going to be, because it's very clearly now been set up in such a specific way.
Yeah.
That I am super duper hyped. Like,
yeah, me too.
Super duper hyped. Now, the other question is Mrs. Flood, who also appears in the episode.
Yeah. How many of the pantheon are we going to get, I guess, is the big question at this point, right?
Yeah, and the other thing was, honestly, there's everything about the way that Flood is presented in it that once again makes me wonder if she also could have just been Ruby.
That's potentially true. Absolutely. It was kind of a strange appearance for her that just kind of felt a little shoved in. I mean, I know it's not because of what we're doing. This is Blood.
Right.
The fact that it feels shoved in means to me that there's something more that we should look at. Maybe the words she's saying, there's some kind of clue there potentially.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. Is do you remember what her last line in the episode is at that moment?
No, I
Oh,
don't.
this situation. Well, it's got nothing to do with me. So she turns her back and walks away.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. Like, it seems like she's very aware of what's going on, but she can't involve herself. And I thought that was very curious. And now, look, again, I'm needlessly speculating about being Ruby because every part of me was like, what if it was future Ruby? And she knows she can't interfere right here. She has to let whatever happens happen.
Right, exactly. And that's exactly the same thing I feel like is going on. There's something about her. And her being adult Ruby does make sense. Very interesting enough that we already have another adult Ruby in this case in the alternate. It would have been really interesting, and it wasn't the case. But if that was the case, it would be kind of funny if the same actress had played, if Mrs. Brian May had also played the adult Ruby in the other thing. Because we never see her full on close until the end. We do see her, I guess, the live version of it. But I don't know. I guess that would give it away too much right away if that was the case. But very, very, very intriguing, right? Very intriguing.
I'm so curious because I just thought, especially with her saying it that way, it was very pointed to the mystery of Mrs. Flood.
Right.
And who it is, you know?
Right. I don't know, but I feel like she's definitely in there for a reason. Because they didn't have to have her in there. They had the whole thing with the stepmom, and stepmom had to be, dealt with the same way, kind of developing up her further tensions with this old lady that's 73 yards away. She didn't have to be there, but she was. I think that's kind of an important thing. Let's talk about Kate Lethbridge Stewart now coming in.
This was my favorite moment in the episode for a lot of reasons. Because, God, I love Gemma Redgrave as Kate.
Me too.
This is one of my favorite characters within the series. I'm glad that we're starting to see more of her, and I know we're going to get more, obviously, because we know that there's more unit coming in the future, obviously.
Right.
We know this because of the trailers, and because we also know that some other characters are coming back as well.
Right.
Including Mel. Mm-hmm. So the idea that whatever was happening with Ruby, that Kate finally gets involved and she has that look when she looks at her, and whatever is said to her unit underlings, and they all pack up and she goes disengage, and even she walks away from Ruby. It's the most terrifying moment in the face of the planet for me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very scary, very well done. And I think it was done for two plays. I mean, obviously, it was good to have Kate here because this is a Dr. Light episode of the first very early part of the season. We don't have the doctor. We have Ruby on her own. It's nice to get a familiar face to kind of like draw us in the connectivity. That's something that Chris Chibnall would never have thought about. But this way we have an anchor to, okay, this is Doctor Who still. We don't know that, but like it's still kind of feeling that, okay, this is someone from the past we can kind of put our anchor to. So I did like having her on. And I feel it was a good thing to like, it was almost like a nice red herring because I don't know about you, but I was like, okay, well, Kate's going to be able to solve this, or Kate's going to get involved, or Ruby's going to get to go with Kate and have someone on her side helping her figure it out, right? It's that moment of safety you get, that little like a lifeboat you get, and then that goes down, and that goes away. You're like, Jesus, she doesn't have the doctor, she doesn't have the unit. What the hell is she going to do in this situation? What the hell is going on here? Great moment. Shrouds you even deeper into despair, deeper into like, what the fuck?
And I think that that's part of why the episode feels so special, right? Because it does feel so interesting and different, and you're like, oh my God, what is gonna happen with her?
Right. Absolutely.
And so this whole like middle section of the episode is very odd because of how time jumpy it can be. And not odd in a bad way, but as long as you're dialed into the episode like the way I was, it's almost dreamlike. And again, that's very Lynchian, but it feels very dreamlike. You're almost locked in and you can't look away. And even though it's going decades and decades into like storytelling, it's so gripping. And I
Yeah.
just felt so engulfed in all of the story that I couldn't look away. You know what I mean? Like, I was just so dialed into it.
The only thing I wish, and it took me out, and I know this might sound petty, but I do wish they had aged up Millie a little better. Instead of giving her a little
Eh,
bit of haircut, putting her glasses on. I mean, I'm thinking back to like the girl who had waited, how they aged up Amy Pond a little bit, Karen Gillan that way. I think it was
yeah.
effective. It was effective. This way, it was a little distracting. Like, okay, so she put glasses on, she holds a glass of wine, and suddenly she's 10, 15 years older. Okay, I'm not buying that too much. Even
I'll
by
be
the end,
honest.
by the end, when she
If
like faces Roger Apgillion, kind of like she still looks like the 20-year-old or 20-year-old Billy. To me.
I'll say this, you're not wrong, and yet I totally just kinda hand waved it away as wibbly wobbly, timey wimey, fake timeline shenanigans. And that's exactly how I looked at it. Because your point, totally fair and valid, and I just wrote it off as it is what it is. You know what I mean? Like,
Like at the end of the day, I adored the episode. I went with it my entire way. At the end, I'm not going to say it's like a deal breaker or anything. Just a note that was kind of like I felt a little lazy. That Davies, I felt a little Russell. I felt a little lazy. Could have just a little bit there, a little bit. But
eh. But I can look, like I said, I mean, for me, it's one of those, I'm just going to let it be. I thought that the first couple of age jumps, though, actually looked pretty solid, all things being equal. Um, I thought it was better once they got to the casting someone else as her.
right, that made sense.
I think that actually worked really nicely, but when everything was said and done, Amanda Walker was quite good
Oh yeah,
as the
absolutely.
old Ruby. So that was it was a nice turn that you got the living embodiment also of the okay, grandma, go to sleep, because it broke my heart when she goes, I used to be able to make it snow, and the hospice nurse is like, sure
They're
you did.
there. They're
Go to bed
there.
now. Like, and your heart just kind of breaks because you're like, no, but she's not lying. She could make it snow.
Right.
Like, let Ruby dream about making it snow. Don't lock away from her. And it just makes me laugh, though. It was such a great living embodiment of the okay, grandma,
Yeah.
let's go take a nap.
Here's some warm milk. Pat. Here's some blankets. Yeah, it was very condescending at that point. But unfortunately, sadly, that's kind of the way it is sometimes. Because like people just don't take the time to really care about our elderly and everything else. It made a lot of sense, unfortunately. Um, what did you think of the Roger Apguilliam of it all?
Dude, so creepy.
Yeah.
I knew her in Bernard, the guy who played him. Just so good.
Mhm.
Uh, it's a great performance.
Yeah.
It's very, again, I mean, here's the thing about this whole section. It doesn't really matter where you live in the world. There's a lot happening on a global level right now of things in politics.
Right.
It just is. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter if you're here in America. It doesn't matter if you're in Britain. Seems like everywhere has their issues
Mm.
right now in politics. I love that the show is willing to confront some of that, but not in the same. I thought the Chibnall era didn't do it right.
Mm.
There's a very specific character that is written in the Chibnall era that is very much meant to be Donald Trump coded and done in the most on the face.
Ham-fisted, kind of.
Yeah, like it's almost too much. It's the thing we talk about when you go too far and you hit someone over the head.
Right. Right.
But in this, I think that it works better as an amalgamation of all the things that are kind of going on in our world, so that it's not necessarily pointed at one specific individual. I think it's kind of an open letter to the frustrations that we all have with people trying to get into politics for power
Yep.
and abusing that power. And I really appreciated the swing, the way that they did it, because it's an uncomfortable conversation for people to have. It's one you don't necessarily enjoy having for obvious reason. Politics tend to tear people apart. It's why, I work at a bar. We don't want people talking politics in the bar because it tends to lead to bad things when people are drinking.
Absolutely. Good call.
It's that sort of thing. So you look at it, I thought that this did it as tastefully as you could do without aiming specifically at one individual while also being very coded to being, you can see parts of a lot of people in politics right now
Right.
being that person. But I think it's one that's very interesting because this whole portion also leads to Ruby is the hero in some, and she ends up saving this alternate timeline.
Right.
And what's interesting is, like, right before the doctor steps on the fairy circle, does he birth that situation in that timeline? Because he's the one who says the name.
Yeah.
And then as soon as he steps on it and disappears, now Ruby's entire trajectory at this point is basically to come up and defeat this prime minister.
Yeah. Absolutely could be. I mean, it would make sense. Especially that could actually explain where he went. Like he was the energy needed, so to speak, to set things in motion. I will say, just piggybacking off the idea of the political side of things and how this is, cartoon drawing of any one of our politicians. I will say it was also very subtly done to a degree. I love the fact that one character that was created, his assistant or whatever, that was done in such a really amazingly subtle way for Doctor Who, I think. Like in terms of like we understand when you watch this what's happening with the power dynamic, with the Me Too movement, with things like that. There's obviously stuff going on there. They don't really have to get all graphic about or talk about or even show just a few lines of dialogue that oh, this is that kind of situation. This situation is a person who's been traumatized by this guy and is still looking not even like out from under the thumb. And that's like almost been like the inspiration of Ruby to say, okay, I'm ending it here. And it was obviously the biggest, it was the fact that he was buying the Pakistani nuclear arsenal. It was that combined with that, it was like, this is enough is enough. I have to stand my ground. I have to make my statement now. This is the time that I've been building my whole life towards, or that we have been building our whole life towards, her, the 73 yarder. So it will.
Yep.
But it's a great idea. And it's interesting to see, like, that's all she came up with. But after like so many years of trying to figure it out, what a great ingenious move for her to ingratiate herself into the like party, into the groupings of people, because that's how she can get to them, and she does. That's the important thing.
The way she plays it, it's a really intense political thriller almost. It kind of reminded me of the Dead Zone. Because it gave me Stephen King. Yeah, like it's very Dead Zone in the, someone knows that this dude's gonna obtain nuclear power, and what happens when someone gets the codes. You see what's gonna happen, and so you try to stop that thing from happening. And I really appreciate that section of it for doing that, because again, it's not a new thing. It's a very well-worn science fiction trope.
Right.
But I like the way it was done here. And I thought that the scene when she finally confronts him with the 73 yards and the snipers are like, there is something to be said about the use of guns very frequently in Doctor Who, in the fact that the Doctor really refuses to use them unless used as a means to get out of a situation that does not involve hurting someone. The Forest of the Angels episode is a perfect example of the cliffhanger ending, him using the gun to set the gravity upside down, and make everything wobbly.
Right.
Perfect. Great. That is exactly it. But because the Doctor refuses to use them, and he doesn't let his companions use them normally. Now, that was a thing between him and Ace. Ace loved to blow things up. That was a contention between them.
Right.
I love that this version of Ruby, who has only been around the Doctor for a little bit, honestly, and that's actually brought up a couple of times, that even when she's talking to Kate, she's like, I barely really spent time with him. I really didn't know him yet. And I love that in doing that, she learned enough to be non-lethal about how she was going to deal with this guy and get him out of power. And
Right.
so using this moment of using her camera to make sure she's exactly 73 yards away,
Right.
and you have all these guns trained on her and stuff, it's actually terrifying. And once again, it plays into exactly what we talked about last week when we watched Boom. We know she's in next season. We don't know how she's in next season. So
True.
there's every real reason to believe that something could happen to her. Why do I believe that? Because Davies is notoriously been known for being pretty hard on the companions in some capacity. Look
Yeah.
what happened to Donna. Look what happened to Rose. Like
Mhm.
he has no problem kind of cutting if he has to do it.
Yeah.
And so this is, and in this way, this is her version of Turn Left. That was a great call, by the way, comparing it to Turn Left. But it works, and it's great. And I was so tense that whole sequence when she was walking backwards, because as the guns were trained on her, she's not going to do anything to them. She's not going to be lethal
Right.
to those guys. So it's
Right.
just uncomfortable and scary, and it works.
Yeah, absolutely. Because especially because there's that little bit of safety in there. They're like, okay, the show's not going to continue with Ruby as a 40-year-old anyway. At this point, she's got to go back.
Right.
So somehow things. So you start fearing, oh, she could die right here, and this could be an interesting traumatic thing, and maybe somebody else picks it up for her, kind of thing. So yeah, it wasn't just a matter of okay, you're going to get away with it. It's going to be is this going to be another Ruby that comes into play somehow? How is this going to connect? I like the possibilities there. Made for some great tone work. Absolutely. Yeah. Another thing I want to
I don't
bring
know,
up.
man. It really worked.
Mhm.
And again, I think that this entire episode is just one big amalgamation of thoughts and ideas handled in such a specific way that they had to do this,
Mhm.
because it came down to they'd already cast Shooty and you had to have an episode. So they had to have an episode that they could shoot without him. But the best case scenario of it is you had to do an episode that didn't really have the doctor because you didn't have your actor. And they actually love that it ended up being this very concisely written horror thriller
Right.
through the lens of the companion in a way that I just don't think we see a lot of. Because the interesting thing is yes, we have Turn Left. On the other end, a lot of the time you have like Midnight. And generally the Dr. Light episodes don't also have the companion front and center. Like,
Right.
the perfect example of that is Blink.
Yep.
Blink is an entire episode that has another character. Love and Monsters is a perfect example of another character.
Right.
Every once in a while, you do get a companion-centric Dr. Light episode, but this one, I mean, Shooty's literally only in the beginning and the end.
Yeah. Absolutely.
There's no doctor throughout it.
No. Not at all. Part of the issue. It's part of the issue. One last thing I had a note on. I don't know if you have anything further than that. We maybe start wrapping up. I find it interesting that we are in the Pantheon. We're talking about the Pantheon. And I brought up Turn Left for a specific reason, besides the fact that it already thematically fits and it's kind of has a loose connection. If we remember, what was the cause behind Turn Left? One of the
You
tricksters.
mean, oh. And here's
Would it
something
be
interesting.
time because of his work on The Adventures of Sarah Jane?
Uh-huh.
Do we bring
So
in the trickster for that?
it's interesting you say that. I've been going down a rabbit hole recently.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of theories right now that you are right. What's interesting is a lot of people are pegging now that it is the trickster. Like the
Mm.
big bad is going to be revealed to be the trickster. What's more interesting is how much of this season, and I had not remembered this, but in looking at it, it's true. He's kind of redoing Sarah Jane season 5 in its storytelling capacity. A
Hmm.
lot of the episodes are kind of interlinked in very similar to what Sarah Jane's season 5 was, which was the season that they never finished because Liz Sladen passed away.
Right.
And a lot of that was supposed to lead to the Trickster returning. Because remember, they had the Trickster in one episode, and who did they fight?
The Doctor.
David Tennant.
Right, David Tennant. Very intriguing.
Yeah, I'm very curious because enough of the rabbit hole that I've gone down leads me to believe that for all intents and purposes, this could absolutely be the Trickster. And it could absolutely be being done like in a twofold reason. One, for we have not had the Trickster in main Who canon in a long time. Sarah Jane Adventures is like everything else. I love it, but it's not the show. I'm loving that we're starting to see more of the cross of being allowed to see things like that in that show, or Torchwood had things, et cetera, et cetera. But I love the idea of also going back to something that you did do in Sarah Jane Adventures, but also trying to find a way to almost give the proper goodbye to that show in some way. I mean, honestly, it'd be kind of cool if they managed to get the kids back from Sarah Jane Adventures and have them in this. And if you tried to do bring them back and have Banner Monroe basically there to fight the Trickster with him and kind of end the show finally.
Right.
Outside of the epilogue that they did.
Right.
Which, by the way, that epilogue, if you've never seen this and you don't know what I'm talking about, during the lockdowns, Davies, when we found out, I don't even think we knew yet he was coming back, but he had decided that in the time, because everyone was kind of just stuck and none of us knew what was happening with anything, Davies did an epilogue of the Sarah Jane Adventures, and it was about 10-15 minutes, and it's on YouTube. It's very easy to find. It was on the Doctor Who's official channel at one point, and they had as many of the actors come back as they could, and it's more of like someone's doing like a dramatic retelling basically of Sarah Jane's funeral, and then all the actors who were in the show in some capacity show up in it as their characters, and they all have dialogue, and they do it's very moving. It's real beautiful. I can see a world where Russell goes back to that and tries to do his proper goodbye to the show in a way that he would not have been able to otherwise.
Finish the story he set out to tell. He never got. I mean, writers hate having unfinished stories. So if you tell your story in a different fashion, but be connected still, I think that's the way he obviously wants to explore that. And I wouldn't be shocked if that's what we got out of it. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. And again, we know in some capacity too that the Tales from the TARDIS stuff is going to matter and take place in the season 2. Davies kind of had hinted at it, and then there is one shot in the trailer where it is very clearly the memory TARDIS and not TARDIS proper.
Right.
Absolutely. So I'm very curious now if all of it is Trickster related, because again, Trickster being at the edge of the universe and being the thing that if you make the Trickster a god in the same way that we made the Toymaker the god, it explains everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right.
I'm curious.
Yeah, me too. Any other notes you took that you wanted to go over for the show? Anything else further?
No, I loved it. I want it noted. I loved the episode. More David Lynch Doctor Who, please. I know I'm going to keep calling it David Lynch Doctor Who, but that's what it was.
It fits.
It fits. If it fits, it sits. So that's how it's going to be. It's a good episode. I'm sorry if you didn't like it. More for me and Paul, and that's okay. I'm going to enjoy it for you. It's fine. I hope that if you didn't like it and you listen to us talk about it, I hope we could give you a different perspective on the episode. That's always my hope in these conversations, is that even if you don't like a thing, that we can have a heart-to-heart conversation, me and you and me, whoever you are on the other side of the camera that I'm looking at right now, smoldering, just how you doing? So I hope you guys are able to enjoy these conversations and look at stuff in a different perspective. I think it's really important sometimes to be able to, especially when you don't like a thing, I think it's very easy to blindly like things. Sure, don't get me wrong, but I think that there's actually something to be said about embracing a thing as it is and really going to bat for it in the way that it is and trying to spread that love and positivity for a thing that you care about.
Yeah.
It is so much easier to blindly hate a thing because it is not the thing that you wanted it to be.
Right. So, and I hope
You know?
for the case that you said, like you come to someone like us, you listen to, if you're a Doctor Who fan, didn't like this episode, you're hearing us talking about it. We're not expecting to change your mind. We're not expecting to go, oh, now I love it. Now I get it. But we can hope that, okay, maybe you're looking at it from a different perspective and maybe you see things that you didn't see before or understand things. Or even if you didn't, I go, okay, I get where they're going from. I still don't really like it, but I understand that I empathize with people who do. So I can get why people do like that. I get why you don't like it. Just try to get how I do like it.
Yeah, well, and that's what I mean. Like, you look at it that way, and I've had enough people who have watched our Crystal Skull and Dial of Destiny reviews and come back after the fact and been like, man, I was not engaging with the movie at all
Hmm.
on the level that I thought that I was. And then for them to come back and go, you guys talking about it and like talking about it the way you do made us see it in a totally different light. And I love that. It makes me feel like you and I are doing a pretty good job at doing the thing that we do, which is
Right.
this.
You
So I hope
cannot
that we can, huh?
you cannot offer me a greater sense of approval or a greater accommodation and to tell me that you listened to this show and it made you want to watch the thing again to see it. To see it from a different angle, because that tells me
Exactly.
we're doing our job, and I hope we do. So,
That's all I want. And so, I know I get loud on here and I get I can be very upfront about my feelings on how I think fandoms are acting about things or whatnot. But the truth of the matter is part of the reason I do it is because I want to be hard on the people that I love the most because you're all people that are in this space with us. And I want you guys to embrace things sometimes in a way that I don't hate breeds clicks. It
absolutely,
does.
that's
Let's be
why
better than
we're
that.
not nearly as popular as we could be.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of
Hopefully, get
people
up
who also
there.
think that when we disagree about things, we're cats pawing at each other. I saw that goddamn GIF. I saw those tweets. I pay attention. Just because I don't engage all the time doesn't mean that I saw who did that. I
Exactly,
saw those tweets. You guys think that we don't pay attention. We fucking pay attention.
we do, we
My
do.
eye, I'm everywhere, man. I'm like
Speak
Brandon Roth in Superman Returns. I'm always around, motherfucker.
Speaking of which, engage with us. We don't mind engagement. Engage with us on Twitter. Engage with us in the comment
Comments.
section. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff.
Do all
You
the
know,
things because we like hanging out with you guys. And guess what? If you actually engage with us more, we can do more content. That's
that's
how that
right.
works. We
That is
can
how that
do more
works.
podcasts. We can have
That's
more
right.
fun. We have a Patreon. There's a link down below.
There
Hit
is.
the Patreon link. Come on, man. Come on.
Link it
Come
up.
on, son.
Patreon.com/PLD Projects. If you
Join
can't,
us. One of us. One of us.
absolutely join people like Austin Goodell, Brandon Buckingham. If you can't, I get it. I totally get it. There's plenty of ways you can engage, plenty of ways you can share, get this community bigger. We're positive Doctor Who here. We're positive stands on most of the things we talk about. We chatted breed positivity. If you're like that, please let us know. If you're not like that, please leave comments anyway. I don't mind hate comments. It's fine. It's algorithm.
Look, man, if
Engagement.
you hate us and you engage with us,
I'm happy.
it's still engagement.
Absolutely. All right, I can folks find you, PJ.
You guys can find me on Twitter and all the socials at PJ Campbell. Yes, it will always be Twitter. I refuse to call it by whatever name it wants to go by now because it just doesn't sound as cool. I like tweeting. I'm not Xing things. That doesn't sound right. It
No,
just doesn't.
sounds dirty, actually.
But I'm gonna tweet. I'm gonna tweet the shit out of that place until it burns to the ground because how can I not?
Absolutely. Find me at Paul Cardenuzio on the old Twitter, like PJ said. You can find me all over the channel. We actually will be doing the rest of the Doctor Who season and here on the Big Blue Box, but then we'll revert back to our other show, Two Mediocre White Dudes on Film, with the John Wick franchise and the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, which, by the way, the PLD Projects audio feed has now finally been shifted over. It is now the Two Mediocre White Dudes on Film podcast feed. We have our own podcast feed now. You're able to spread it out. The original PLD Products is now Two Mediocre White Dudes on Film. So if you followed that one, you're already following us. It's all good. You also do my review show about V. It happens every 2 weeks. I do a weekly show about Star Wars called Holy Snokes with Matty Gunner. And tomorrow's show will feature a special guest, Ken Knapsack, always a friend of the show. Fun guest.
I love Ken. I want to get Ken on our Doctor Who show.
I don't really more likely to get his partner Joseph Scrimshaw on, because Joseph Scrimshaw's actually a big Doctor Who fan. I don't think Ken really knows much about Doctor Who. Hey, you never know. That could happen. That could potentially happen.
Here's what I want. I want Ken to be on an episode of our show where he never talked to Joseph about it. He didn't talk to us. It's just a random episode of Doctor Who, and we make him watch it.
You know what? After the season's over, I could see us doing that. Could be our special. We can come back for a special episode here and there, and that would be one of our special episodes. I think it's a good idea.
I want so badly to do that. I also want to do commentaries with Ken. That's what I really want to do. I desperately, and I'm going to will this into existence. I don't know how, but after. I don't know what it is, man. But when you and I talk about movies and talk about things, and then we talk to Ken or we talk to Mark, I'm reminded of all the times we would all just like sit around and talking about things we love and drinking a beer and talking about those things. And all I could think is, you know what would be really fun is to get like the band back together over Zoom or something and do like a commentary of something that we all really love and we're just hanging out. Maybe it's something we could all float together, because you know, there's some Space Wars movies that could be kind of fun to do that with. There's episodes of Doctor Who. You know, there's the Young Guns, which we all know everyone here is a fan of. I'm just saying there are ways to do the thing.
Absolutely. 110% we'll get that done. But yeah, that is going to do it for us, guys. Next week, we'll be back with, I forget the name of the episode, but the next episode in Doctor Who, something about Doomtown or Divetown or something. I don't remember exactly what it is.
I don't know. We'll find out. I try not to pay attention to it. You know that. I'm trying to go in more blind to the episodes these days.
That's good for you. I'm happy you're being successful with that. But we'll be there for it, whatever it is. I hope you'll be here for whatever it is next week. Same time, same timey-wimey channel, all that good stuff.
Same bat time, same bat channel, motherfuckers.
Take care.
Peace.